Windflit is one of those operators people keep commenting in an attempt to debunk the sentiment that there are no bad operators, and just like Spuria, Kirara, or Verdant, he's really not. Windflit is a fine operator, but I do understand why people aren't exactly excited about him. Regardless, he's still pretty cool and worth some proper recognition. Windflit is an Artificer supporter who's focused on offensive art support. If you're not super familiar with Artificers, they're a supporter subclass which lets you deploy devices to support your allies. Each device is tied specifically to the operator. Windflit's gives a 20% attack boost to the operator it's supporting, but only if it's a caster or supporter. This can go further to 22% if you have him at potential 5 or higher, but given this is a gotcha 5-star, I'm going to assume he's at base potentials. If you're watching this and wondering if you should build your pot 5 Windflit or not, just keep in mind that your numbers are going to be about 2% higher than mine, 4 to 8% in some other cases. Whoa. Windflit's devices last for 30 seconds and have a 15-second cooldown. However, unlike Roberta, Windflit's devices are capable of stacking. You can have a maximum of 2 of his devices out at once, and if they're boosting the same target, their buffs are additively stacked, meaning you can give an operator a 40% attack boost. The period where this is possible, though, is a bit clunky. There's only a 15-second period where both devices are boosting the same operator at the same time due to the cooldown in between deployments. However, as you'll come to see, 15 seconds is all you need. Both of Windflit's skills are focused on both his own offense and his devices. His S1 is a crit skill which lets Windmill do 250% of his attack to all enemies in the surrounding 8 tiles. It's a true AoE skill with a pretty decent damage modifier on top of that, dealing over 1500 damage at Elite 250 with max mod. But it also gives the operator equipped with this device, given that they are a caster or supporter, 1 SP. This is an effective SP gain of about 0.167 SP per second, which is a 16% reduction in charge time for auto recovery skills. This recovery rate isn't as good as some alternatives, but keep in mind you're also getting a pretty hefty attack buff on top of that SP gain. Battery effects aren't that common for non-6 stars, as the closest alternatives would be Stainless or Suzerain, both 6 stars. However, battery effects are the most effective on operators with offensive recovery, which between casters and supporters, there are 3 in the entire game. Steward, Angelina S1, and Lucilla S1. Windflit's S1 isn't something you should be relying on for general SP generation. Ironically, the reliable batteries aren't reliable batteries, at least in the traditional sense. Instead, it's more of a combat trick in Windflit's favor. Windflit's S1 holds up to 3 charges, which is really important for how it's meant to function. If Windflit's S1 was a more traditional battery skill, you would be forced to decide to use them as either a battery or an attack boost. You would either want to use them outside of combat to charge up skills before combat, or use them during combat for the attack boost. Instead, Windflit's S1 is designed in a way to get the best of both worlds. You only want to be using his devices during combat already, so Windflit stores SP in himself over time, and unleashes all of it onto your operators of choice when combat initiates, when he starts attacking. Over the lifespan of the device, Windflit will produce an additional 5 SP, which is a total of 8 SP over a 30-second duration when considering the 3 stored SP in Windflit's S1, or 0.267 SP per second on average. This SP gain also stacks with the number of devices too, meaning you can get even more SP out of this if both devices are attached to the same operator. The timing isn't going to be easy, but it is for doubled SP production on Windflit's part. Windflit is also a supporter, so you can just buff him if you have no other target, and an added benefit to Windflit's S1 having charges is that any SP that he would gain from his own S1 isn't lost. Buffing him with his own S1 basically means S1 charges at least 1 second quicker, and on top of that, his S1 is a damage modifier to his current attack, meaning it multiplicatively stacks with his device attack boost. It's not like you really want to be using them on Windflit all the time, but the added option of him working really well with his own devices is pretty good. I'm honestly quite surprised with how smart Windflit's S1 was designed. It avoids the issue of making either the attack boost or the battery functionality redundant by tying the SP generation to Windflit's attacking as a crit, which makes sure the SP is given in combat, a time when you would need the attack boost the most. Windflit's S2 though wants to cut straight to the chase. No more silly SP shenanigans. You want an attack buff, you're getting an attack buff. The skill boosts his own attack by 160%, but also increases his attack interval by 0.5 seconds. Most importantly though, his talent's effect is doubled, increasing the attack boost from 20% to 40% per device. When the skill ends, you get another device. Fun. It's an offensive support skill, definitely not the first of its kind. Doubling the output of Windflit's devices is quite good, and with both supporting the same operator, Windflit is capable of granting an 80% attack boost. An easy comparison would be to compare with Warfarin's S2. Warfarin gives 10% more attack and has a better cycle time, especially given her talent. However, Windflit has quite a few advantages over Warfarin. Windflit gives you much more control over the target, given that the target has open tiles around them. You don't need to rely on RNG or crazy isolative setups that minimize Warfarin's effectiveness as a general medic. Windflit also is still capable of buffing attack during downtime, which Warfarin can't do, and having multiple devices that can be attached to different operators regardless on Windflit's position gives Windflit a ton more flexibility in who gets the buff when it's needed. Where Warfarin gives in strength, Windflit gives in versatility and consistency. Worst case scenario, you can just buff Windflit himself with his devices and pop his S2, buffing his attack to crush your levels of bustedness. Although Windflit's S2 is the same duration as Warfarin's buff, his S2 having a short duration has been a criticism of him. However, the 15-second duration matches perfectly with the overlap duration of having two devices deployed at once. By staying limited to simply just the duration of the double device overlap, the skill doesn't waste uptime on a lesser boost that's not at full force, and instead cycles back quicker to another activation, so you can get your extra device quicker. The skill is both an offensive support tool and a resource generator, so balancing uptime and cycle time is important. However, none of this matters if I can't talk about the main issue with purely offensive supportive operators. Why bring an operator to buff someone to less than a full operator's worth of effectiveness when you can just bring another operator? The main reason people consider Windflit to be bad is because it's difficult to really justify using him over another caster or supporter. However, when you treat Windflit as if he is just a caster replacement, you're downplaying a lot of his strengths. Keep in mind, Windflit isn't a caster, he's an entire operator on his own. He just so happens to boost other operators. Artificers have quite the defensive prowess on their own. Windflit having about 440 defense and 2700 HP on top of 2 block, he essentially functions as a tankier version of Courier or Ponsiris that's also capable of clapping back with his skills. Although he does lack consistent offensive output, he makes up for that with his devices, which supplement his tankiness by buffing the offense of other operators. Windflit shouldn't just be used as a buffer, he's an operator all on his own. Buffing is his side gig. His defensive role gives him a bit of extra flexibility when it comes to squad assignments. He can take the place of a pioneer or a defender, given it's not essential that you need the HP or defense and block that they would provide otherwise. If all you need is simply a blocker to hold back enemies so that your casters can deal with them, then there really isn't any downside to bringing Windflit at all. And when it comes to his buff targets, casters alone cast a decently wide net. I've seen people complain that his limitation is why he's bad, but I really don't get it. The main reason why Windflit is limited in targeting is because of how busted it is to give out attack boost for basically free to physical damage dealing operators. Simply just because of how defense and resistance work, it's much safer to design an operator that gives an 80% attack boost to an arts damage dealer than a physical damage dealer. Hell, there's an operator in CN at the moment that is basically Windflit, except for physical damage operators. She does like half the work that Windflit does, except she seems infinitely more busted, simply because she can buff Cruz the Kingglin, Exusii, and Ashe by giving them just 300 defense pierce and nothing else. Also Nutlet. Windflit supporter targeting is much more limited, as you're only realistically going to be buffing Windflit himself, which is more the intention of the class's inclusion. However, supporters are the only class, besides casters, that have a majority of their subclasses deal arts damage at base. So, although you're not really going to be buffing your Hexers and D-Cell Binders, you do have the option. Ritualists are the exception, as they are pretty good targets, as it just makes inflicting Elemental Burst a ton easier. Better yet, I found the most fun Windflit use not to be buffing the Ritualists, but the Primal Casters. Buffing the elemental damage dealt by Wormy or Diamante can help absolutely shred through enemies, as in the current state of the game, elemental damage is true damage. Mysticasters are also great Windflit buff targets since they can take the best advantage out of a short duration but high attack buff on his S2. Hell, if you want to be an absolute meme lord, you can filter a portion of Windflit's buff through bards, making it possible to buff physical damage operators with him, just partially. There's a lot of possibilities with Windflit. I personally find his squad building cost to be rather low, since he can just take the place of your typical blocker for the sake of additional offensive support. He helps roll compress and thus saves deployment slots. Sometimes you're not able to deploy a second caster due to range tile limitations, deployment order, or simply a lack of DP, so in those cases Windflit can provide some good value. He's also pretty good in integrated strategies, since roll compression matters a shit ton more when you're limited with what operators you have access to. But I can also understand why many people may not be super excited about him. Having an operator exist to buff other operators isn't exciting on its own. Better to have a new toy to play with than a toy that makes playing with your other toys better. And thus, having to fork over the 5-star investment for something that isn't always immediately impactful isn't the greatest for some. I personally find him and other support-focused operators to be quite fun. His combo potential is quite vast, and nothing beats super buffing Wormy to incinerate Patriot in one fell conflagration swoop. Remember, there are no bad operators, just bad mindsets. I hope you all have a great day, and I love you all.